Hi guys, it's Bunnymon and welcome to today's video and welcome to another WWE reaction. I already have done a Vince McMahon video about him being the most evil villain in WWE. It was really good video. If you're interested in checking that one out, you can click here. However, I want to see more of Vince McMahon. I want to learn more about him, and I got this comment by Motivation Weight Loss. I'm gonna ignore that. And the person said, Bunnymon, you must react to the downfall of WWE's Vince McMahon's 9 Lives, a small documentary on Vince's abusive childhood. See, like, this is one thing I had no idea. Like, I don't know about his history. I don't know about his childhood. I don't know what in a way made him who he is today. You know, like, if you connect the dots, and there is always dots to be connected. Everything you do in life, everything the life does to you influences who you are. It is a choice, after all, to become a specific person. Of course, there is no denying that. But the obstacles you have to go through in life, they're not the same for everyone. And the way you address them and the way you choose to learn or heal from them or choose the path after them is what makes you who you are. So I want to check this video by Cultaholic Wrestling, not Catholic Wrestling, and it's called The Rise and Fall of Vince McMahon. However, this video was recorded or uploaded, published 1 year ago, even more, and we all know what happened since then. So I don't think we're gonna be checking that, but maybe we can see hints and pieces here and there to maybe figure out what is happening with Vince McMahon and have our own opinion, you know, make our own opinion based on the facts that we already do have, which are facts. Other things are allegations, these are facts. So let's go and check out the rise and fall of Vince McMahon.
For generations of wrestling fans, there has been no more omnipresent figure than Vince McMahon.
True.
For 4 decades, McMahon has owned, operated, expanded, and merchandised the living hell out of what is today known as the WWE, turning those 3 letters into the shorthand that defines the wrestling industry as many know it. McMahon took the family's New York-based wrestling enterprise and expanded it into a global phenomenon, pushing boundaries like no promoter before him and succeeding in ways that no prior ring baron could have fathomed possible. Through Vince's rise to Arcadia, the surname McMahon came to identify the first family of pro wrestling, or sports entertainment as he would prefer it. And with his fame came fame for his family, as his wife and children cultivated their own celebrities on and off screen. Hell, Vince himself is one of the most bombastic and unique characters in squared circle canon, going from astute on-screen barker to megalomaniacal tyrant when the kayfabe curtain came tumbling down, which only led to further success. McMahon the businessman and McMahon the character have each been defined as ruthless, as cutthroat, as masters of the game with thorough control of a board they knew the ins and outs of. Difference was, McMahon the character would sometimes get his comeuppance to cathartic effect. McMahon the businessman was a little harder to thwart. For most of the 21st century, McMahon has defined the mainstream wrestling we consume. Given the man's need for control and his freakishly driven nature, most assume he'd helm pro wrestling's most powerful chair until the day he died. That he was a dragon only time could slay. McMahon has had his stumbles, some more dizzying than others, but he never ever fell. And most came to assume that he would never ever fall. Until he did. I'm Ross Tweddle from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is the rise and fall of Vince McMahon.
Did it twice. Did double it.
Vincent Kennedy McMahon is a 3rd-generation promoter, the grandson of boxing impresario Roderick Jess McMahon, and son of longtime New York wrestling merchant Vincent James McMahon. Promoting was clearly the family business, and it stood to reason that one day the man commonly, but erroneously, referred to as Junior would one day take up the same game. In January of 1952, when Vincent K was 6 years old, his grandfather founded the Capitol Wrestling Corporation, alongside veteran wrestler turned promoter Joseph Toots Montt. Jess McMahon died of cerebral hemorrhage in late 1954, paving the way for a 40-year-old Vincent J to step into his father's shoes. In 1963, McMahon and Montt ceded capital from its host governing body, the National Wrestling Alliance, and rebranded their territory as the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Though Vincent J would later renew his ties with the NWA after buying out Montt in the early 70s, he remained king of wrestling in the Big Apple. And Junior coveted that throne. The younger McMahon endeavored to be part of the wrestling business, especially after going with his father to the monthly Madison Square Garden cards. He wanted to be a wrestler, but Vince Sr. discouraged this notion. Nonetheless, Junior began to enjoy the on-screen roles, performing ring announcing duties on the syndicated programs and later becoming TV announcer at the age of 26. While McMahon flourished in these roles, the urge to promote is what drove him. In the 70s, McMahon had mixed success in that field. When Vince Sr. fell out with his local promoter in the state of Maine, Junior took over the region and didn't lose his arse. McMahon also helped his father expand the WWF syndication, tripling their reach as the 70s wore on. McMahon also promoted bizarre spectacles like Evel Knievel's ill-fated Snake River Canyon jump, and the Muhammad Ali Antonio Inoki farce that, for all its foibles and flaws, did prove to be a seminal moment in the evolution of mixed martial arts. Though these endeavors weren't rousing successes by any means, especially the Knievel stunt, which Vince took more than a bath on, they sharpened McMahon's promotional instincts and gave him valuable experience. As the 70s turned to the 80s, McMahon found success running a building he'd purchased, the Cape Cod Coliseum in Massachusetts. Not only did McMahon promote concerts in the venue, but he briefly owned a minor league hockey team that played its home games there. These ventures helped McMahon sock away a little cash, while giving him more lessons on the art of promotion. As time wore on, McMahon began making arrangements for a potential takeover of his father's territory. In February of 1980, Vince and wife Linda founded Titan Sports to serve as their own promotional outpost. Not long after, Vince Sr. was looking to get out of wrestling, and by 1982, he had talked of selling. Junior seized this opportunity and put together an offer that was virtually contingent on what was now the WWF having immediate success under his watch. In June of 1982, McMahon bought out the ownership stakes of his father, as well as other shareholders Gorilla Monsoon, Arnold Scarland, and company.
Like nowadays, your parents just give you things, you know? They're like, just take it, just take it. But back in the day, you had to go and buy it from your father and give him money for it.
Treasurer Phil Zacco. Among the concessions and provisions that were part of this deal, McMahon had to pay out $1 million in installments over the course of the next year to the outgoing shareholders. If he defaulted on a single payment, McMahon would forfeit all of his shares back to his father and others. But for the moment, and for much longer we'd learn, Vincent Kennedy McMahon was the sole owner and operator of pro wrestling in the northeastern United States, until he decided he wanted more. At the time of McMahon's purchase, and for the decades beforehand, pro wrestling in North America adhered to a system of territories, each with their own promoter and a regular cast of local heroes and villains. Young wrestlers would work different territories to pick up seasoning and experience, while older stars would move around to begin life anew in a fresh region. The NWA World Champion would also tour frequently, facing the top challengers in each area. Most of these territories fell under the banner of the National Wrestling Alliance, which Vince Sr., as noted, pulled out of in 1963 before rejoining in the early 70s. There were some groups that ran outside of the NWA jurisdiction, but really, most of the continent was under some kind of NWA rule. Like his father before him, McMahon knew that he was going to break from the NWA sooner or later. But unlike his father, Vince wasn't content to just run shows in his designated part of the map. As McMahon explained to Sports Illustrated in 1991, in the old days there were wrestling fandoms all over the country. Each little lord respected the rights of his neighbouring little lord. No takeovers or raids were allowed. I, of course, had no allegiance to those little lords. McMahon had grand expansion plans, and they would require, to borrow his words, a little ruthless aggression. But not all takeovers were hostile. In the autumn of 1982, McMahon purchased the Los Angeles territory from promoter Mike LaBelle. LaBelle maintained an office job as regional representative for his pain-free sale, but otherwise, LA now was Vince's city. With the sale came television in Los Angeles, giving McMahon a TV presence in the US's two largest media markets of New York and LA. Soon after, McMahon began chipping his way into Ohio, expanding just beyond WWF's allocated base. The state was mostly controlled by Ole Anderson, the promoter of wrestling in Georgia. Unlike LaBelle, Anderson wasn't feeling too rosy about McMahon promoting in his backyard. So much so that Anderson verbally confronted McMahon at the NWA's annual convention in August of 1983.
Beef is
Before a room filled with
starting.
fellow promoters and associates, Anderson lambasted Vince for pushing his product onto Anderson's turf and vowed retaliation. Amid further commotion from a number of parties in the room, McMahon simply got up and calmly walked out. He was walking out on more than a conference. Vince McMahon was walking out of the NWA altogether. The New York territory was once more ceding from the NWA as McMahon was prepared to strike out on his own. Also leaving the NWA was his secretary and treasurer, Jim Barnett. He was joining McMahon in his national expansion, though he was doing so quietly, as he still held stock in the Georgia territory. Barnett had fallen out with Anderson and was now aiding the enemy in his goal to grow. And the growth continued. Around the time of the NWA convention, McMahon scooped up a Sunday morning time slot on the USA Network, previously held by Joe Blanchard's Southwest Championship Wrestling. Though cable was still in its relative infancy, a USA Network broadcast was nonetheless a national outlet for his burgeoning product to be seen. McMahon soon overtook Ohio with ease, gaining TV clearance in Cincinnati and Dayton while promoting local arena cards with all of his top names. That autumn, he even tried brazenly signing away NWA World Champion Harley Race, which would have prevented Race from headlining the inaugural Starrcade, where he'd have passed the generational torch to Ric Flair. Race, however, declined, knowing how much of a gut punch that would have been to the entire NWA. But McMahon wasn't done with the onslaught. Big territorial names were brought into the WWF to power the vessel. Tony Atlas, Paul Orndorff, Mass Superstar, the Iron Sheik, and others joined McMahon for the long haul, as he sought to assemble the best roster money could buy. The biggest acquisition, of course, was disgruntled AWA headliner Hulk Hogan, signed in late 1983. McMahon then set forth a series of events that would result in a plain-spoken WWF champion Bob Backlund losing his title to Sheik, who would then transition the belt onto Hogan. On January the 23rd, 1984, Hulkamania as we know it was born. McMahon continued his national push. He took over the wrestling time slot in St. Louis while producing his own programming from the historic Chase Park Hotel. In 1984, cities like Chicago, Nashville, New Orleans, Memphis, and Dallas allowed the WWF onto their local airwaves. The roster continued picking up key pieces. Greg Valentine, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Jesse Ventura, Bobby Heenan, the Junkyard Dog, the British Bulldogs, and many more were plucked from the now rival groups, each quickly making their mark on a growing federation. In mid-1984, the WWF acquired a star of another galaxy, pop sensation Cyndi Lauper, which birthed the transcendent rock and wrestling connection. Thanks to Lauper's involvement, the WWF broadcast several specials on MTV, the hippest broadcast hub for teenagers of the day. Along with other celebrity endorsements, the WWF was looking like the place to be. Though more traditional wrestling was still preferred by fans of other territories, what the WWF was putting out there was a pop culture smash that appealed beyond the fringes of typical wrestling fandom. A widely expanding audience followed Hogan and Lauper as they led McMahon's colourful horde down the Golden Mile. Meanwhile, McMahon remained cunning. In the spring of 1984, through a secret consortium, Vince bought majority interest in the Georgia territory, acing out Ole Anderson. Fans of the Georgia product were left mystified on July the 14th, when the program they were expecting to see on TBS was bumped in favour of a McMahon-hosted wrestling card, in what has become known in wrestling parlance as Black Saturday. Georgia fans were outraged by the move. Network owner Ted Turner was less enthused when McMahon refused to produce a show tailored to the tastes of the built-in audience. Low ratings, as well as Turner's decision to surround Vince's TBS show with more wrestling-orientated products, led to a financially desperate McMahon selling the time slot to Jim Crockett Jr. in the spring of 1985. The spring of 1985 is when McMahon unleashed the first WrestleMania, broadcast on closed circuit. With Lauper, Mr. T, and other celebrities adding gloss to McMahon's one-ring circus, the first WrestleMania was a stirring financial success. Good thing for McMahon, because his future in wrestling was dependent on the card not being a bomb. On the back of McMahon's vision, the hits kept on coming. Saturday night's main event was developed for NBC, putting pro wrestling back on network television for the first time in decades. There was even a Saturday morning cartoon series, Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling, that further appealed to America's impressionable youth. McMahon ended the rise in pay-per-view market, providing another revenue stream for the WWF. WrestleMania soon became the premier supercard, where history was made, champions were crowned, stadiums were filled, and giants were slammed. Wherever the official attendance number for WrestleMania inside the Pontiac Silverdome lies, the visual of Hogan body slamming Andre the Giant will remain timeless. SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Royal Rumble became the three other tentpoles of the WWF pay-per-view calendar.
And still today,
Each
right?
of them invented to try and stunt the growth of Jim Crockett Promotions' own attempts at expansion. Stars like Macho Man Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, Ted DiBiase, Jake Roberts, The Ultimate Warrior, and others flocked to the WWF in search of greener pastures, as well as their largest star turns ever. As the Federation was flying, territories were dying. By the end of the 80s, once lucrative groups like the Von Erichs in Dallas, Stu Hart's Stampede, Bill Watts Mid-South, Ron Fuller's Continental, and Eddie Graham's Florida had all bitten the dust. The only group remotely comparable to McMahon's empire was Jim Crockett Promotions, which had expanded beyond its Carolina base to become a national power of its own. However, the mounting debts in 1988 sealed Crockett's fate. He sold the family business to Ted Turner himself, which was the functional birth of World Championship Wrestling. But even Turner's fortune couldn't put a dent into what Hulkamania era WWF was accomplishing. What Vince McMahon had built throughout the 80s was far too big, far too strong for any rival to bring to its knees. Though some would say that the WWF was perhaps a little too big for its own good. Through the 4 decades that McMahon helmed what is today WWE, he had to navigate his share of scandals. The first major test came in 1983, when 23-year-old Nancy Argentino, the girlfriend of star wrestler Superfly Jimmy Snuka, died of severe head trauma. Argentino had accompanied Snuka to Allentown, Pennsylvania for a set of TV tapings, and had sustained the injuries sometime earlier in the day before Snuka attended his booking. Snuka reportedly told contradictory stories to hospital employees, while the coroner and pathologist believed the injuries weren't incurred by the accident. They had also observed more than 24 wounds to Argentino's body acquired over time. Snuka, however, was not charged in Argentino's death in 1983. Reportedly, after a meeting between McMahon and the local police, charges were never filed. Shortly after Argentino's death, McMahon was queried by the New York-based attorney Richard Cushing, to whom McMahon reportedly said, "Look, I'm in the garbage business. If you think I'm going to be hurt by the revelation that one of my wrestlers is a really violent individual, you are mistaken." As for Snuka, he was back in the ring days later and continued working in a featured role for the WWF until the summer of 1985.
Mafia business!
After 4 years away, Snuka returned in 1989, once more babyface attraction. Poking holes in the WWF during its halcyon glory was pretty tough. Its fans were diehard, true blue believers that lived for the exploits of their larger-than-life heroes. And those detractors, they were far too busy thumbing their nose at the very idea of pretend fighting to care about what happened within that lowbrow bubble. Until about 1991, anyway. 1991 was the year the ironclad WWF began turning to rust. A questionable decision to book Sergeant Slaughter as staunch Saddam Hussein supporter in the midst of Operation Desert Storm and put the WWF title on him drew heaps of bad press. There was little interest in seeing Vince's proxy war play out at WrestleMania 7, where Slaughter lost the belt to Hogan, Mr. America himself. So little was the interest that the WWF had to move Mania from the gigantic Los Angeles Coliseum to the LA Sports Arena, 1/5 of the size, by the way, due to abysmal ticket sales. But that was a mere left jab compared to the crosses and uppercuts that were coming. In July, former ringside physician Dr. George Sahorian was convicted on 12 counts of illegally distributing controlled substances, specifically steroids. Once upon a time, Sahorian had been a fixture at Federation cards in the state of Pennsylvania, where he would do business with wrestlers that had the cash. Shortly after Sahorian was sentenced to 3 years behind bars, Hogan appeared on the talk show Arsenio Hall, apparently to discuss his own steroid use. But instead of being completely upfront about how he got those 24-inch pythons, brother, Hogan flat out lied, claiming to have only taken roids to rehabilitate an old arm injury. The reigning WWF champion, hero to millions of children, and the face of McMahon's wrestling empire looked really bad on this national forum. The tabloid floodgates burst open. Hulk's credibility took a major hit, and the once mighty federation was reeling along with him. The notoriously muscle-bound WWF was going to lean out by the early months of 1992, as those with the more bulging biceps were cast to the wind. Hogan himself was taking an extended sabbatical after WrestleMania 8 to let the negative press die down a bit. In the run-up to WrestleMania 8, however, bigger problems came to the surface. Backstage staffers Pat Patterson and Terry Garvin resigned from the WWF that March, while the company severed ties with ring announcer Mel Phillips. Several ex-wrestlers, employees, and even former ring attendants levied accusations of misconduct going back years. Former referee Rita Chatterton would personally accuse McMahon himself of improprieties. The whole sorry mess came to a head on a very surreal episode of Donahue, where McMahon, several accusers, and former WWF stars that had fallen out with McMahon shared the stage for a disjointed quarrel. During the hour, the studio audience laughed at some of the discourse, treating it as silly because it came from, to them, a silly world. Longtime WWE critic Phil Mushnick later wrote, "As long as the WWF's real-life horrors are considered a laughing matter, no one's laughing louder than Vince McMahon." Chances are, McMahon wasn't laughing too loudly as 1992 ground onward. Business fell at an alarming rate, likely due to a combination of scandal, the absence of the biggest star, tainted as he was, and probably some product fatigue for the children aging out of the human cartoons demo. Rock and wrestling had long gone radio silent, and McMahon probably wasn't laughing himself come November of 1993. More than 2 years after Sahorian's conviction, McMahon was indicted on charges of illegally supplying anabolic steroids to his wrestlers. Though the WWF roster had clearly shrunk in more than one turn of the word, the steroid problem was clearly not over, as the US government was now going after the Federation boss. The trial was set to begin in the summer of 1994, months after the WWF lost big in 2 civil cases. One saw former ring announcer Jesse Ventura defeat McMahon in a 6-figure suit over unpaid royalties. In the other one-time enhancement talent Chuck Austin was awarded nearly $27 million after Austin broke his neck while taking a bad bump during a 1990 match with the Rockers. But this was a criminal proceeding, meaning that McMahon faced possible time behind bars. In all, the government brought 6 charges against McMahon, 3 of which were thrown out before the trial. The remaining charges were 2 for distribution and 1 for conspiring to distribute. Over the 2-week trial, a number of wrestlers, including Hogan, testified, while McMahon's team did not enter a defense. The distribution charges were later thrown out on account of insufficient evidence. On the sole count of conspiracy to distribute, on Friday, July the 22nd, 1994, following 16 hours of jury deliberations, McMahon was found not guilty. While McMahon avoided prison, it's not like banner times were ahead. Dark days clouded the WWF in 1994 as sponsors pulled out from the negative publicity, and the audience continued to diminish. Company cornerstone Hogan recently debuted in WCW, while fellow household name Macho Man Randy Savage made the jump by the year's end. McMahon tried turning things around behind a youth-oriented campaign, labeled The New Generation. The era was filled with bad gimmicks, overly cartoonish storylines, and sparsely attended events, as the in-ring brilliance of Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Shawn Michaels and others could not offset the alarming erosion. The WWF even lost money in the fiscal year ending in April 1995, bleeding $4.4 million. This means cuts were coming, and an already thin roster and faculty would get even thinner as 1995 wore on. And then, that autumn, a challenger emerged. Brash 41-year-old Eric Bischoff had been overseeing WCW for 2 years, and landed big names like Hogan and Savage to improve the number 2 promotion's visibility. That
we know he did.
Owner Ted Turner granted WCW a Monday night time slot on TNT to go head-to-head with a wounded Monday Night Raw. Against most prognostications, Monday Nitro immediately took the fight to the WWF, exchanging viewership victories throughout the months ahead. Though WWF had cornered the market on nationally broadcast Monday Night Wrestling since the mid-80s, Nitro made an immediate splash with a very contemporary, very hip show predicated on weekly live broadcasts, scintillating action, pay-per-view caliber matches, and ground-shaking surprises like the unexpected debut of recent WWF star Lex Luger on the premiere. The WWF was losing ground in the pro wrestling culture war. Not only did Raw come off feeling stale by comparison, but their first counter-punch was pretty lame. A series of skits lampooning Ted Turner and the top WWF stars that had jumped ship. Before long, the skits had degenerated into personal attacks on Turner, and were a device to try and stop a merger between Turner's media empire and Time Warner. The skits became so mean-spirited that USA Network stepped in and ordered McMahon to stop. You can see why McMahon was feeling pressure. Not only was Nitro continuing to find success with a winning formula, but WCW had just signed away two of the WWF's biggest remaining stars, Razor Ramon and Diesel. The two re-debuted in WCW under real names Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and were vaguely presented as McMahon-endorsed foot soldiers on an on-screen promotional rivalry. The WWF initiated legal action over that insinuation, as well as character trademarks, but they couldn't stop WCW from rolling out their next masterstroke, turning Hogan heel and aligning him with Hall and Nash to create the New World Order. Nitro was on a month-long winning streak against Raw when Hogan shocked the wrestling world by going bad, and that streak was set to continue for a long time. McMahon's WWF began tweaking its formula, gradually moving away from the family-friendly bollocks. But the NWO-powered WCW was the clear #1 promotion in 1997. A desperate McMahon inked Bret Hart to a front-loaded 20-year deal to keep Bischoff from signing him away, while struggling to keep troublemaking Shawn Michaels happy at the top of the card. Then when McMahon didn't feel like paying Hart the big money on his contract 1 year into that deal, he gave Hart permission to reach back out to WCW to see if Bischoff would take him off his hands. Reluctantly, Hart signed with WCW in the autumn of 1997, while still reigning as WWF champion. McMahon, of course, found a creative way to get the belt back off Hart, and it's got a hell of a backstory. Seriously, we've got an hour-long documentary.
This is literally the documentary that I planned to watch, the Screwjob documentary.
On it, narrated by the lovely and charming Sam Driver. Give it a look, will you? Losing the theoretical WWF champion and a Federation performer of 13 years to the domineering rival felt in many ways like a rock-bottom moment for McMahon, especially when his act of treachery against the Hitman angered so many in the WWF locker room. McMahon tried to save face through a laughable sit-down interview with Jim Ross, where he baby-faced himself to the nth degree. It didn't exactly work now, did it? But that didn't matter. Through the ugly and contentious Montreal Screwjob, McMahon accidentally stumbled upon a winning character. Himself. The following year, Raw closed the gap on Nitro through the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin and his run-ins with suspended boxing star Iron Mike Tyson. WCW was suddenly experiencing their own creative woes at the time, while the WWF was showing off a new attitude to its audience. After Austin dethroned an ailing Michaels to win the WWF title at a wildly successful WrestleMania 14, he found a new rival in McMahon, who was still presenting himself on screen as a conscientious executive, to negative crowd response, of course, in a post-Montreal world. On April the 13th, 1998, the mounting tension between Austin and McMahon came to a head when Stone Cold challenged the boss to an actual match. To those of you who weren't watching in 1998, this was an insane development. Vince was actually going to wrestle? Really? I mean, really? The boss and former announcer? That fella. Austin versus McMahon didn't actually happen because of Mick Foley's intervention. The intrigue of actually seeing the match take place gave Raw its first ratings win over Nitro in 22 months. And there was more to come. Nitro and Raw exchanged victories through the spring and summer months, but by the year's end, Raw assumed a commanding lead. Austin, The Rock, Foley, and others headed up an attitude blitz, which was way cooler than the fossilized happenings.
You don't know how lucky he got these guys at the right time. And I would say it's the guys that pulled the whole company, you guys. Look at them. Look at them.
The channel. As 1999 wore on, the WWF was lapping WCW several times over in terms of audience and perception. The meteoric rise of the WWF in this period, as well as the goodness of WCW before its sharp decline, ushered in the first major wrestling boom since the mid-80s. Federation stars were everywhere in the mainstream media, and in-ring catchphrases entered the public lexicon. Within a 6-month stretch, the WWF debuted SmackDown as a weekly series on network TV. launched an initial public offering on Wall Street, and Vince McMahon announced the formation of a new football league, the XFL.
Oh,
there was
okay.
even a themed restaurant in Times Square, for crying out loud. Not bad for a promoter who apparently was in dire straits just a few years earlier. The XFL bombed spectacularly, but the league's failure was partially offset by McMahon's biggest in-ring victory yet, the demise of WCW, as the cancellation of their TV shows led to Vince buying up WCW's most lucrative assets for a fairly paltry sum. McMahon became the undisputed king of American pro wrestling and was now seemingly bulletproof in that world. This was in spite of a few public black eyes, such as the death of Owen Hart and a very ugly legal fallout, as well as a 9-figure harassment lawsuit filed against the WWF by former women's champion Rena Sable Mero. That was settled out of court months later. As the 21st century rolled on, McMahon lorded over a wrestling empire that gobbled up video libraries from departed organizations, cashed in on every nostalgia craze imaginable, built headline stars from its developmental arm, and enjoyed life as the only serious game in town. The wrestling fad may have faded as the noughties ticked by, but the diehards still numbered deep into the millions. McMahon's once lacerated organization was now the consensus brand of choice and appeared to be unassailable. Not that there weren't agonizing moments. The 2005 death of Eddie Guerrero led to an enactment of wellness policy, which would come under intense scrutiny in 2007 following the Chris Benoit double murder-suicide. Months after that horrific event, more than a dozen WWE performers were found to have been receiving steroids and prescription drugs from an internet company called Signature Pharmacy. Most of those performers wound up suspended. In the fallout from Benoit, McMahon and WWE fell under the microscope of the US House Subcommittee on Commerce, Trade and Consumer Protection, and the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. He was privately interviewed by a committee in late 2007 and asked what had recently motivated the company to reach out to troubled former WWE talents with an offer to help them with any rehab or treatment they may need. McMahon's answer was 2 words: public relations. That's it. I do not feel any sense of responsibility for anyone of whatever their age is who has passed along and has bad habits and overdoses for drugs. Sorry, I don't feel any responsibility for that. Nonetheless, that's why we're sending the letter. It is a magnanimous gesture. By the time of McMahon's interview...
Dude, are you kidding me? What do you mean you're not responsible? Your whole company, your whole work ethic, everything is literally driving these wrestlers to have to do some of these measures and some of these things to cope with it because you are not giving them the right things. Like, this is so mean. Of course it's a company's fault. I mean, you cannot just, like, of course you cannot just blame the company, but it is to a fault. Like, you see what they have to put themselves through. You are asking from them a lot. And how else are they gonna do it? Some of them, they don't have the strong character to do it, so they rely on drugs and other things and painkillers because it's painful. Like, you are putting them in danger every time you put them out there, and you're saying it's not your responsibility. It is your responsibility to give them help, and not only that, to pay for them if they are asking for help. You have to treat them better. They're your stars.
Most of the Benoit murkiness had dissipated. The John Cena-led WWE trucked along through 2008 and 2009, amending their content by becoming family-friendly once more, and started bringing in celebrities from all walks to host Monday Night Raw. By the time Jeremy Piven was out there pretending to give a damn, McMahon's WWE was pretty far removed from that post-Benoit peril. For most of the 2010s, WWE continued along as the clear choice of the American wrestling fan. Total non-stop action sputtered through repeated misfires, while Ring of Honor was for hardcores only. New Japan picked up a little steam by the mid-2010s through new market penetration, but not enough to profoundly jostle Vince's show. WWE remained king, but that would come with its own issues. There seemed to be a real take-it-or-leave-it relationship with the audience that was growing increasingly weary with WWE storytelling. Between McMahon's reported micromanagement of creative, the infantile storytelling, the insistence on pushing specific protagonists against vocal fan wishes, and the cutting off of ascending favourites, fan discourse seemed to sour on the WWE way with each passing year. None of that was going to sink WWE, of course. Huge TV contracts that were signed in 2018, plus the 10-year deal to bring events to Saudi Arabia, have made WWE idiot-proof from a financial standpoint. Still, many fans
Saudi
began looking
Arabia
for something else. It's why All In 2018 caught more than a little attention.
Cody.
It's also why AEW hit the ground running in 2019. People were starved for a long overdue alternative to the WWE way on a national level. And Tony Khan and Warner Media gave them
There
one.
we go.
Soon, WWE fan favourites began flocking to AEW. Whether it was the voluntary exodees like Jon Moxley, Bryan Danielson, and Adam Cole, or the misused castaways like Miro, Keith Lee, Tony Storm, and FTR. Turns out, in this day and age, you can make a hell of a company out of people that McMahon either threw out or chased out. Since escaping, a number of ex-WWE stars have spoken very frankly about their former employer's culture in podcast interviews. While their stories aren't all doom and gloom, the composite drawn wasn't exactly a sunlit landscape. Much of the chatter discussed a very broken system, insisted upon by an elderly control freak that had apparently lost his creative spark a long time ago. Meanwhile, back in WWE, there was some curious shuffling going on in the office. Longtime Vince loyalist Bruce Pritchard returned to creative in 2019 after a decade away, while the maligned John Laurinaitis returned to his talent relations post in 2021. Former talent agent Nick Khan came on board as WWE president, replacing the exiled George Barrios and Michelle Wilson. Meanwhile, theoretical successor Paul Levesque seemed to be losing power backstage, especially after third brand NXT failed to stifle AEW's growth. Levesque's wife, Chief Brand Officer Stephanie McMahon, abruptly...
Stephanie McMahon, as of tomorrow, I'm taking a leave of absence from the majority of my responsibilities at WWE. WWE is a lifelong legacy for me, and I look forward to returning to the company that I love after taking this time to focus on my family. That's normal. Yeah, she took time off, and her husband took over.
Announced a leave of absence in the spring of 2022, as people were wondering what in the hell was going on at WWE headquarters. Then, on June the 15th, 2022, the first real domino fell. The Wall Street Journal reported that McMahon was being internally investigated for $3 million in hush money he gave to a former employee he'd allegedly had an affair with. On the heels of this story,
hush money
McMahon began
sounds
making
like
bizarre
McMahon
cameos
business.
on WWE television, perhaps to curry public favour or just to show no fear. Appearances aside, Vince stepped down from his CEO position but maintained his usual iron-tight grip on creative. Then on July the 8th, the news got worse. The Wall Street Journal reported on an additional $12 million in hush payouts to other women, including $7.5 million to a former female talent that McMahon allegedly coerced, before eventually letting her contract lapse.
So
when
this
she
is nothing
refused a
new,
later
what's
request.
happening now.
On July the 22nd, a
It's
full
just worse
28
than
years to the
before.
day after beating the federal steroid rap, Vince McMahon abruptly announced his retirement from WWE.
At 77, time for me to retire. Thank you, WWE Universe. Then, now, forever, together. Hashtag WWE, hashtag thankful, hashtag have to do it, hashtag oh I'm screwed.
WWE through a short tweet. It was a day most thought would never come. Days later, it was revealed that the U.S. Securities
I don't
and
think he
Exchange
would have
Commission,
retired
as
until
well as
the day
federal
he died,
prosecutors had
if
launched
this didn't
inquiries
happen.
into McMahon's secret payouts, which are believed to have been the true cause of Vince's hasty exit. For a man many believed would die in office, a man that had survived crises that would have destroyed less resilient promoters, McMahon ended up unraveling in the headlines over the course of 5 weeks. There was no roaring blaze of glory for such a self-styled alpha, just a sterile peace-out message posted on social media. No matter how one feels about Vincent Kennedy McMahon, few would have predicted that his possible final moment in professional wrestling would have been so relatively meek. For such a master of spectacle, it's an ironic finish.
True.
As of this recording, the wrestling world is still adjusting to life without Vince, and it will continue to do so for a very long time.
I think we're doing fine.
McMahon's influence on not just his own company, but all rivals that tried sizing up to his lofty standing, is what defines the general public's comprehension of professional wrestling. Much of the wrestling we see in or out of WWE is at least partially influenced by Vince's vision, whether it good or bad. For the last time professional wrestling was without Vince calling any shots, you'd have to go back to a time when only 2 Star Wars movies had been released theatrically.
Oh my
That was 4
God,
decades
what the
ago.
hell?
When you have that insane level of longevity, it's
Yeah.
hard to fathom life after the curtain falls.
Yeah.
As such, Vince McMahon probably can't fathom how he'll spend his days without occupying the captain's chair.
Oh, I
And
think
whether
I
one's
think we
happy
know
or
how
sad
he's
to
spending
see
his
Vince
days.
go, none of us could have fathomed a wrestling world beyond that point either. In the end, Vince McMahon was no different from those old territorial promoters he went to war with. Like them, his career was derailed by the actions of Vince McMahon.
Yeah, the actions of Vince McMahon, or that's a big word. Yeah, 40 plus years literally being the head of WWE and creating what we have today. We cannot take that away, but it comes, like, with all success comes also hate and comes also stuff like this. I do believe that it is difficult to succeed without, like, to succeed so big without literally harming a person or two along the way, intentionally or non-intentionally. Like, I'm not saying like purposefully you are going and harming someone, but it could happen, you know. This is such a good documentary. I have learned a lot about his life, and one thing I didn't know is that these allegations have been there for a while. It's not something new, and I thought it's like, oh wow, it's like the newest news, and I had no idea. And like, people, yes, you have heard of this before, but there is hush money here and there, and this time the hush money is not helping anymore because it got way worse. And Brock Lesnar as well is in it. Yeah, we are gonna see what's gonna happen this time. I think he had to resign. He didn't want to resign, and I think if it was his choice, he would not have just resigned with a peace out Twitter post. This guy loved the spotlight. He loved to be in the middle of it all, and he definitely, for his company and after 40 plus years of what he has been doing, the goodbye would not have been like this, the actual goodbye, if he could. But I think he was not able to because of what's happening. So that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for recommending this. It actually helped me out learn a lot about Vince McMahon, and I don't know still what my opinion is. I think that this guy, work-wise, I respect his accomplishments, but as a human being, I genuinely think that he was not the greatest. But that's just my opinion, okay? I could change my opinion tomorrow or even tonight. Like, opinions change, but this is how I feel right now. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. Also, check me out on my Bunnymon TV channel. It's my second live react channel. Although I do the live reactions on Twitch, twitch.tv/BunnymonTV. I will leave a link in the description. I do live reactions. I react to videos that you recommend on my Discord. I also play video games, and I play video games with you and the subscribers on my Twitch as well as Kick. So if you are interested, I will leave a link in the description, and you can join me and say hi Bunny, and I can say hi back to you, and we can have a chit chat in the chat section there. Yeah, but don't forget, live on YouTube Bunnymon channel, this channel, 24th of February. I don't know if this video is gonna go out earlier or after it, but 24th of February, I'll be live here on this channel where we're gonna watch together Elimination Chamber in Perth. I mean, we're gonna watch it from home, but it's gonna be in Perth. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Have a wonderful day, and see you tomorrow with a brand new video. Bye!